So this is a very interesting thing that there's a parallel in my country, and I'd say in Britain too, and that is that the traditional Labor parties or sort of left of centre parties, social democrat parties here, were very committed to the working party, to working people, and to those who are disadvantaged or dispossessed. But what has actually changed is not just that in the name of identity politics they're creating new aristocracies out of victims, real or perceived. There's something else going on. They actually think working men and women are the enemy of the environment. They actually despise them, a lot of them. And there's working people are, and I think, actually beginning to wake up to this. So you're seeing a massive political realignment. So in a lot of cases, and I think there are probably parallels right across the Western world, you've got people in the so-called leafy suburbs, very well-to-do, who are increasingly now disinterested in social cohesion and even in patriotism. They're more committed to environmental and social causes, and so they're tending to vote now for, ironically, left-wing Green-type parties, and it's the sort of workers and middle class that are attracted to the sort of centre-right parties. You're seeing quite a dynamic shift here. And you talk about that too, the possibility for a real realignment in coming times where the old left and right definitions and breakups mean nothing.
No, I think that's very accurate. I mean, there's a very good book out recently called Despised out of the UK, which talks about, the attitudes of sort of the, a friend of mine calls them the cognitive elite, and their attitudes towards the working class. And the great problem is, can we find a champion of working class, if you will, somewhat nationalist perspective, who doesn't indulge in white nationalism and racism? That, I mean, even Donald Trump, who is an awful human being, in the last election picked up votes among Jews, among Hispanics, and even among African Americans and Asians. I think a candidate who could speak some of the same things that Trump talked about, some of which were very legitimate, but without the rancor, without the sort of dog whistles to the white nationalists. I mean, I just think he had diarrhea of the mouth. He didn't know when to shut up. He didn't know. He didn't realize that he wasn't sitting in a bar in Queens talking to his friends. And I think that basically this is sort of the happening everywhere. The Labour Party in Britain lost seats in the Midlands and in Yorkshire that have never voted for a Conservative. I understand in your last election that everyone expected the Labour Party to win, and the more conservative party won because working class and middle class voters deserted them. This is beginning to happen in this country as well. The question is, once Trump is out of the way, whether or not there'll be somebody who's got more appeal to minority groups. But we're starting to see it. You look at Texas. Recent elections in Texas, border town, McAllen, overwhelmingly Democratic, overwhelmingly Hispanic, just elected a Republican mayor. You know why? Because they want the border controlled. Because if you live on the border and then all of a sudden you've got people who are coming into the country illegally, including some criminal elements, but even or people who might have COVID. Australia has the advantage of being an island. Basically, big island, but you can cut it off. We have a huge borders with both Canada and Mexico, and so I mean, I think there are a series of issues that are coming up that will continue to separate working and middle class families from the progressives. The progressives seem to be, as a friend of mine said, the alliance of the overeducated and the undereducated. And basically what they do is they say, hey, you know what? We're going to give you free money so you don't have to work, or you can only work part-time. And that's how we'll buy you off. And we see this in states like California, where a lot of the middle-class jobs have disappeared. The industrial jobs have disappeared. So the traditional way of working people moving up has been cut off, And so the progressive response is essentially transfer payments. And those transfer payments, you know who pays for that? That's the middle class. I don't think Zuckerberg and Bezos and those people are paying the taxes that go to transfer payments. I think it's poor schmucks like us.
It's interesting to draw out one thing you said there, the unexpected election result in Australia. There's something behind that that's really important. A lot of people now don't feel they can safely tell a pollster what they really think.
Yes.
We are silencing people. One would have thought there'd be a little more graciousness and a little more intelligence on the part of modern elites in the face of this. There ought to be a willingness to recognise that by the constant intimidation, the constant attempt to silence and to belittle those who have a different view, you drive them underground in terms of their views. Now, the ultimate expression of what can happen there is that people say it's all a swamp, and so they do something wild and radical, as they did in the election of Trump. I've always seen him more as the product rather than the cause of the dislocation and the disruption.
No, and I think that the more, for instance, we push, let's say, the critical race theory approach, what it's going to do is it's going to create a generation of white nationalists. I mean, think about it this way. You're a young person growing up. You're being told from day one that being white is bad, that America is bad, that being male is bad, particularly for men. You're telling all these people that everything that their parents hold dear is bad. And some people will go along with it and will allow themselves to be emasculated in that way. But if some people are going to say, to hell with you, and then they don't believe anything. So, if you've been, let's say, lied to or misled on climate or the pandemic, instead of saying, hey, but we do have to do something about these issues, you say, well, it's all a lie. Today in America, I don't know if this is true in Australia. I know the Sydney Herald is kind of your New York Times, right?
Sydney Morning Herald.
Those papers, people just don't believe them. And I teach a class on propaganda, and one of the things I say, it's not that they purposely lie. They just remove anything that interferes with the narrative. So, for instance, you can talk about electric cars, but you can't talk about the fact, well, if you have electric cars, you got to generate a lot more electricity. And how do you do that when you're shut down your nuclear plants and your gas plants? Where's the electricity going to come from? You think it's going to be cheap? You think it's going to be reliable? But the problem is you can't raise the issues. And again, this comes from the education system. I find this in theology as well as academia, also in increasingly even in the sciences. Everything is political. And I was talking to one bright young guy getting his PhD in engineering at Stanford, and the kid says to me, yeah, I'm looking at this. I'm saying, well, here are the advantages, here are the disadvantages, and I don't know where we're going to get the electricity. And so he asked this professor, and the professor says, you don't ask that question.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, now, I'm not saying electric cars are good, bad, indifferent. Maybe they're a good thing, but you have to understand that there are going to be problems with the rare metals. There are going to be problems with disposal of the batteries. There's going to be problems in getting the electricity. You're going to lose some of the redundancy that you have now. Could you imagine if you had a breakdown in your electricity supply, and all the cars are electric? The society would come to an end. The one thing that worked during power outages is the car that has gasoline in it. I think that it's not that I necessarily disagree with some of the positions that Greens and progressives have. It's that we can't even debate them reasonably.
Yeah.
Even a guy like Steve Koonin, a leading physicist, is essentially sent into the digital gulag. Because the agenda. And then there's another factor, and it's important in Australia because your population is so much concentrated in your capital cities, is that it's also a elite that is overwhelmingly urban, overwhelmingly affluent, because to live decently in Sydney today, you have to have a lot of money, particularly if you're under or of course the favorite way is to inherit it.
Yep.
But so you have a class of people who will say, well, shouldn't everybody live in the city? Well, I remember speaking at a conference at Harvard, and some people from the city of London said, well, we all live in the city. And I said, oh, by the way, do you all have country houses? And of course they all did.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jamie Dimon wants everybody to come back into the office. Well, that's okay for him. He's got a luxury apartment in New York. He's got a 30-acre estate in Bedford up in Westchester County. And and God knows how many other properties. And believe me, I don't think he drives back and forth. He either takes a helicopter or has a chauffeur. For him, the office is great. For the poor schmuck who's got to commute from New Jersey for an hour and a half every day, it's not so great. And this is how COVID is accelerating this class divide.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.